Happy Friday, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We've got a fun show coming up. We're actually really loaded today. Later on in the program, we're going to welcome back the former Georgia quarterback, David Greene, a guy who's always got some really interesting things to say about the current crop of Bulldogs. We'll do that with David a little bit later on. That's going to be a fun conversation. Of course, Jeff Sintel here on this Friday as well. A lot of recruiting stuff to recap with Jeff from the week. We'll have some fun doing that, including a little more thoughts from Jeff on Carson Beck and some of the things that Beck said this week. I'll also tell you how you can pick up one of these tailgate apparel sweatshirts like I'm wearing right now. A lot of you ask where this stuff comes from. A lot of the stuff that I wear on the show each and every day. We'll try to make that easy for you as a part of today's program. And we will begin with this. Folks at ESPN, maybe a little oversight. Maybe overlooking, I guess the better phrase. Maybe not giving some credit where it's due to some of the Georgia incoming freshmen. We'll correct that error off the top of the show. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I will concede at the very beginning of the program that what I'm about to say probably doesn't matter all that much. I did have an emotional reaction to this, but ultimately it's not that big of a deal. I'll certainly grant you that, but we're also a Friday on DawgNation Daily. We're all about having fun. So we're going to have some fun for the next couple of minutes at ESPN's expense because I love preseason content. I love preseason previews. I especially love the subgenre of spring previews because they are to themselves kind of their own little cottage industry of content. ESPN.com, the other websites do this kind of stuff. We're around here getting really excited about Georgia spring practice. Dogs get going a little later than a lot of the other teams around the SEC because this year the Georgia spring game G-Day happens to be a good bit later than the others. They're always going to be considering the Masters and things like that when it comes to this kind of scheduling. Georgia's G-Day won't be until April 20, so Georgia's going to start spring a little later than some of the other programs do. But I like getting excited about the spring. I like getting excited about Georgia spring practice, obviously. I even like getting excited about the other SEC teams, too, because after all, Georgia plays these teams, and it's always kind of fun to know and interesting to know what's going on the other campuses. So with that in mind, ESPN wrote a piece that's kind of right up my alley, ESPN.com. The headline says, Spring Brawls, True Freshmen You Need to Know. Now, when you scroll through here, you see a lot of names, some of these even SEC names. Antonio Alfano from Alabama gets mentioned. Derek Stingley from LSU gets mentioned. Our old friend Jaden Hazelwood now in Oklahoma, he gets mentioned. Baylor Cupp, the defensive tackle for Texas A&M, guy that Georgia could see in November, he gets mentioned. Bo Nix, the incoming freshman quarterback at Auburn, gets mentioned. You kind of roll through the list here, and you see a lot of interesting names. But what I can't help but notice is completely missing from this list is any Georgia name whatsoever. No single incoming freshman to UGA from their crop of early enrollees makes the list of spring ball freshmen that we're excited to see from ESPN and the writer of the piece, which is our buddy Tom Van Haren. No Georgia guy on the list whatsoever. Now, let me reiterate what I said a moment ago. I'm not mad about this. It's not worth getting mad about. This is not the kind of thing to be, biased against Georgia or anything like that. That's not my point. My point is, it does seem like a fairly egregious error not to include a Georgia guy in this group of spring ball true freshmen we're looking forward to see. And as a way of kind of chronicling this, I did my part to try to list just some of the incoming freshmen for Georgia who'll get a chance to go through spring practice as early enrollees. Now, let me rattle off this list. If you're watching on video, I'll show you some of these. Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, both 5 stars. Clay Webb, the 5-star, one of the top players in the state of Alabama. A couple 4-star linebackers, Ryan Trouble Davis, Tresman Marshall. In the case of Marshall, he's dealt with a little bit of an injury situation, but nonetheless. Jermaine Johnson, more on him in a moment. The tight end, Rylan Godey, also a little bit of an injury situation with him, but still one of these incoming freshman early enrollees. You get the quarterback, Dwan Mathis, who Georgia swooped in to get right there in December. Kind of an exciting recruitment. He'll be here, as well as his counterpart at quarterback, Stetson Bennett. You got DJ Daniel as well, and the honest truth is, given my propensity for clerical errors, I think I've even missed a couple. Lewis Seen's an early enrollee, right? Tramel Walthor's an early enrollee. So, I should have added their names to this list as well. It is a August body, in other words, of incoming freshmen. You would think that one of those guys, Smith, Nakobe Dean, at least any of these 5 stars, you think they may have granted some sort of the ability to be on this ESPN list of spring guys that we're looking forward to, but apparently for ESPN that's not the case. But I can promise you this, for Georgia fans, that is indeed the case. There's plenty of reason to be excited about what all of those guys could do this upcoming spring. But maybe the most interesting omission from this particular ESPN story is a name that got highlighted on a different ESPN story in terms of freshmen to watch. It's almost like the ESPN folks aren't exactly on the same page in terms of what they are paying attention to this spring, because while Tom Van Haren omits the entire list of ESPN guys from what he's talking about, Chris Lowe over at ESPN.com did highlight Jermaine Johnson, one of the aforementioned guys, on another kind of one of these spring preview pieces. And what Lowe writes about Jermaine Johnson is that the 6'6", 245-pounder was one of the most coveted junior college prospects in the country last year and has been on campus since December. He doesn't need much of an introduction, as most fans know him from A Last Chance U, which is the Netflix series. Lowe goes on to say, the bottom line is he can go get the quarterback, something the Dogs need after finishing last in the SEC in sacks during the 2018 regular season. So I'm obviously, as you probably guess, a lot more in line to agree with Chris Lowe on this than I am the other ESPN writer, that I do think that Jermaine Johnson is definitely something worth paying attention to, and I think that a lot of these early enrollees for Georgia are going to turn some heads in various ways during the spring. Now, when it comes to some of the defensive stuff, you don't necessarily get to see that on G-Day because, let's face it, spring football games are designed as scrimmages to glorify the offense, and Jermaine Johnson's not exactly going to be allowed to tackle Jake Fromm to the ground or any other Georgia quarterback during that game. But I do think that Lowe is correct in pointing out what Johnson might be. And when you think about fast-forwarding to the fall and what's really going to happen in the real college football Saturdays coming up September, October, November, the infusion of these young guys in the Georgia pass rush, I do think, is going to really matter. And when you look at spots where newcomers, incoming freshmen, or in Johnson's case, a junior college transfer, when you look for these guys that could make big impacts on the field this season, I think that spot's a place that you pay really close attention to that. We've actually talked about that a couple of times already this week on DawgNation.com. But more important than what I think on this is also what Georgia coach Kirby Smart thinks about this. Because if you want to go back to December, it sounds like he very much agrees with Chris Lowe that impact freshman guys going through spring practice for the first time coming up in just a couple of weeks. Kirby thinks that Jermaine Johnson, along with his partner in crime there at that pass rush spot, Nolan Smith, are just as good a names as any to consider for a role like that. Here is Kirby.
We certainly feel like we've dropped off in our speed on the edge from the Lorenzos and Davins and Leonard Floyds of the years to be able to get Jermaine and Nolan. I don't know that there's two better pass rushers in a signing class anywhere in the country when it comes to speed. Jermaine can run. Nolan can run. And these guys have got to help us disrupt quarterbacks, which we struggle with this year.
So let me reiterate what I said off the top of the program. I think that's good stuff from Kirby Smart there. They want to be better with the pass rush. Johnson and Smith give Georgia a chance to do that. Those are two of the newcomers that'll be going through spring practice for the first time here coming up in a couple of weeks. But let me just go back to the beginning to say, for the most part, I'm just kind of having fun at ESPN's expense on this. I don't think it's a big deal. They didn't put any Georgia freshmen on their particular list here. I think it's just kind of a fun thing to debate and kick around. But there is probably a more serious take to pull out of all of this, and I think in a roundabout way, it's actually good news for Georgia. If you compare preseason 2019 to preseason 2018 and preseason 2017, to a certain extent even preseason 2016, if you compare this year's offseason going into spring practice to the previous ones, I think we would sit here doing a show like this, having the kinds of conversations that we have every single day, and I think we'd be really hopefully so-and-so freshman is good, otherwise Georgia won't be. Hopefully so-and-so freshman makes a big impact, otherwise Georgia's in a real problem. Georgia's in a real mess. Georgia has had a roster situation the last couple of years, even with as successfully as Kirby Smart has recruited, it's been a roster situation where Georgia was in desperate need of newcomers to make an impact. Otherwise, the overall depth chart was just going to be a little bit too thin. In 2019, that's not quite the case so much anymore. In 2019, the freshmen that are coming in, including the early enrollees, who are going to be going through spring practice for the first time, these are more luxury items than they are necessities. I do believe that Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson, the two players that ESPN ignored, at least in this one piece, but the two players that Kirby Smart touted, I think they can add a lot to the Georgia pass rush. And to the tune of winning a national championship, that's going to be really important. But even if Nolan and Jermaine don't have big years, don't step up, and in the way that many of us expect, there's still Adam Anderson, Brenton Cox, guys already on the roster that can potentially do some of those things as well. This is the deepest Georgia roster we've seen in quite some time. A lot of these incoming freshmen could be major impact players for it, but they don't necessarily have to be. Either way, I think it's safe to say that UGA fans are more excited about these guys during spring practice than apparently ESPN is. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, with the radio at noon as well, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever you find podcasts, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really glad to have you part of our program today. We're also fully loaded. It's Jeff Sentell coming up in just a couple of minutes, and then later on today, we'll welcome back for the first time in a while the great former Georgia quarterback David Greene. Fun conversation coming up with him. And of course, David and I are both big fans of Tailgate Apparel, the apparel store right there in downtown Athens, 279 East Broad Street in Athens. And if you're watching on video, one of the things that you'll notice is that I'm wearing this really cool Tailgate Apparel sweatshirt. And a lot of times people ask me, BA, where do you get the stuff that you wear on the show every single day? Because I am, a fan of the Georgia gear. I like wearing that. I like showing it off on our video. Well, today we want to make this really easy for you. If you go to the DawgNation Instagram page, it's just at DawgNation on Instagram, you can see a link to this very sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now from our friends at Tailgate Apparel. I'll talk more about that with David Greene when he joins us in a little bit, but please check out DawgNation on Instagram. First of all, you ought to be following DawgNation on Instagram as it is, but check out the link to this sweatshirt on the Instagram feed for DawgNation, and you can either for yourself or for somebody else, especially for putting in kind of these late final winter cold days, these Tailgate Apparel sweatshirts feel really, really good. They're soft and fleecy, and they just kind of keep you warm, and they get some other cool stuff as well. You can browse around when you find it. So see the link for that on the DawgNation Instagram page right now. All right, we'll have Jeff Sentell in a moment. Before we get to that, I wanted to highlight a couple of the things that Jeff and I have been talking about as of late. And if you were watching Before the Hedges on Wednesday, presented by Kroger, you saw a great conversation regarding a couple of elite recruits that Jeff has spoken to in the last few days. And I wanted to make sure that we highlighted some of that on DawgNation Daily before Jeff joins us, because I'm going to ask him about some of this in a moment. Let me start with five-star linebacker Mikael Sherman. Sherman was on campus for Georgia this past weekend, a part of a flurry of big-time visits for the Dogs. And one of the things that Jeff pointed out on Before the Hedges on Wednesday was that while Sherman was at Georgia, and it seems like he and the Dogs are becoming fast friends, as Jeff points out, the truth is the relationship with Sherman and UGA has been strong for quite some time. Even going back to last summer, a conversation that Jeff Sentell had then is evidence that this very impressive linebacker has seen a lot that he's liked about Georgia for quite some time. Take a listen to that.
It stands out amongst one of my schools. They really show genuine love, and they really, a lot of schools want to tell you what you want to hear. They told me all the goods and bads about Georgia, but it was, the good always outweigh the bad.
So I love the idea that he says one of the things that I like about Georgia the most is the honesty they've shown with me, the fact that they have told me how I fit into their plans, the good and the bad. As I've explained before, presumably the good is you have a chance to be a part of a great program. The bad, there is a lot of intense competition at linebacker right now, as evidenced by some of the early enrollees that we spoke about a moment ago. But in the case of Mikael Sherman, he sees a lot to like about Georgia, and with Jeff over the course of the last few months even went into more detail about exactly what that is.
I feel really good about Georgia and Coach Dan Lanning. I really mess with the coaching staff as a whole. Nick Williams, Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, everybody. Because when I went down there, it was a really great, warm welcome, to be honest.
Yeah, so listen, I love the idea that Georgia seems to be making such an impact on Sherman. Sherman's another one of these guys from that Beltway region, the Maryland, Virginia, D.C. area. That's fertile recruiting soil for all the elite programs this year, Georgia included. It sounds like Georgia's making a big impact on Sherman, and that could have some reverberations with some of the other guys in that region as well. That's going to be a fun story to watch from Jeff Sentell at DawgNation.com. I was going to hear some more from Sherman. If you don't mind, though, let me transition and talk about a different name here for a moment, because it's another interesting guy. That's Mitchell Mays, a really impressive-looking four-star offensive lineman from North Carolina. Another one of these guys that, much like Sherman, has been impacted by guys like Dan Lanning and others. Sherman is also, as you might guess, really been Mays has been really strongly impacted by Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman. This is a guy that Jeff Sentell has written about at DawgNation.com recently, and when you hear some of Jeff's conversation with Mays, you get the impression that magic that Pittman has in the recruiting trail continues to work. Here is more with Mitchell Mays.
My best parts were building a better relationship with Coach Pittman and being able to connect with the current players, Jamari Baylor, and those are my best parts for me.
I love the idea.
Does Georgia have a chance to get into your visit group for your official visits, I guess, a little bit, or how do they position themselves this weekend?
Oh, Georgia positioned themselves very well. They treated me as a priority to their offensive line, and I felt good about it.
Yeah, listen, first of all, I interrupt Jeff all the time. I guess it's appropriate that I also interrupt him on that clip. I think I interrupted him on the same clip when we played it on Before the Hedges on Wednesday. Either way, you love the idea that Jamari Salyer is one of those offensive linemen who's been tasked with impressing a guy like Mitchell Mays. I just think that's really good stuff. Mays went on in some other comments. We're not going to have time to play those. It doesn't look like. We're kind of running a little short on time here. Mays went on to talk about how Georgia kind of sees him as a combo offensive lineman, a guy that can play guard or tackle, and he's kind of okay with either one of those spots. I would invite you to check out Before the Hedges on Wednesday, where we heard a lot more from Mays. There is a lot to like about this young man, and coming up with Jeff Sintel in a moment, we will talk more about how he fits into those 2020 plans for Georgia, the offensive line, with some of the other names that Georgia's talking about. So that's coming up with Jeff Sintel in a moment. Before that, though, here on this Friday, we'd like to kick off the weekend with our Kroger Kick Off to give you an idea of some of the stuff happening around UGA athletics this weekend, and to also remind you about some really fun things coming up at your local Atlanta Kroger as well. This Friday, no different than any other, very busy for UGA on the athletic front. First of all, the men's basketball regular season finale at South Carolina is on Saturday. The SEC tournament for the men begins next week. Lady Dogs did drop a game in the SEC tournament last night, effectively ending their season. Sounds like no more postseason to come for them. Gym Dogs tonight at an event in Birmingham called Elevate the Stage. This is one of those multi-program events that you see in gymnastics from time to time, so that's where the Gym Dogs are tonight. Diamond Dogs hosting Presbyterian through the weekend. Pay attention to the weather on that. I know there's going to be some tricky stuff around the weekend when it comes to that, but Diamond Dogs hosting the Blue Hose this weekend. Softball team hosting a number of teams, including Bowling Green tonight. So it's busy when it comes to everything going on with the world of UGA athletics this weekend. That's all part of our Kroger Kickoff here on DawgNation Daily each and every Friday. And Kroger's got you covered coming up for St. Patrick's Day as well, with savings on corned beef brisket, cabbage, and tomatoes to make the perfect St. Patrick's Day dinner. For a great recipe, here's a website for you to go to, Kroger.com/what'sfordinner. That's Kroger.com/what'sfordinner. And you can get ready for truly authentic St. Patrick's Day dinner coming up really soon. All right, it's really fun to have you on DawgNation Daily today. As we said, we'll do David Greene, the great former Georgia quarterback, coming up in just a moment. For now, though, on Sherman and Mays, who we just talked about, and everything else going on with UGA recruiting, let's welcome in our buddy Jeff Sintel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. Great to have him as a part of the program on the Friday. And, Jeff, I hope you're doing well on this particular day. And I guess, if you don't mind, now we'll do more of this on Tuesday as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All when you're back with us on the program. But let me gloat a little bit, Jeff, here at the beginning of our conversation, because at last check on your Twitter feed at Jeff Sintel, when you put out the survey of who is it flambéed? Is that what you do to a creme brulee when you blast that fire on top of it? We both did that at a local Marlowe's Tavern this past week, and you put out there who did it better. So far, the voting is favoring me on that. So can I gloat about this for a minute before we move on?
This is the order of DawgNation, man. It's like you, my friend Brandon Adams, you're kind of like the glory boy, golden boy quarterback, and I'm the simple offensive lineman clearing holes for you. We got to make sure you look good. And I guess the verb, I'm going to call it, that's how you brulee, a cream brulee, I guess. I don't know. It sounds interesting to me. And, hey, most of the feedback we got, most of the intel on that was Jeff went too hard in the paint with the blowtorch, while Brandon finessed his way around a nice-looking brulee.
Yeah, that's about right. We'll show you more of that on Tuesday on DawgNation Day. That's going to be a lot of fun to do there. We had a great time with our friends there at the Brookhaven location of Marlowe's this past week. A great time. They were always such gracious hosts to us. Jeff, let me bring you in on, before we get into the more serious recruiting stuff, let me bring you in on something I was talking about before you joined us a couple of minutes ago. I was kind of having some fun because ESPN put out its list of freshmen they're paying close attention to this spring, and despite the fact that Georgia was essentially number 2, and in the consensus recruiting rankings, even #1 according to one outlet and service. None of the Georgia incoming freshman early enrollees made the ESPN list. Now, I said before it's not a big deal, but I'm still going to, kind of chide ESPN for omitting the Georgia guys on this. So I tried to correct the record about this a moment ago, and I'll give you the floor to do the same thing. If I ask you, of the early enrollees coming in at Georgia, both in terms of what you think you might see from them this spring, hear from Kirby Smart on their behalf, or fast-forwarding to the fall and what these guys might do on a field later on this season, which early enrollee or two, or however many you want to mention, who kind of pops to mind, top of mind for you in terms of what you're expecting to see this spring?
We didn't rehearse this, Brandon, or even set me up on this. Like, I guess folks don't even know we don't script anything on our calls. But I can very readily say I have two divisions here. Number one is not just the freshman, but the early enrollee in general. That would be DJ Daniel and Jermaine Johnson. I would say those guys are 1A and 1B in terms of out of the entire group making the biggest impact. But then if we reserve it simply for the 2019 true freshman, I think my first name might be Nakobe Dean, the inside linebacker, followed by Tyreek Stevenson, the do-it-all defensive back. Lewis Seen's kind of in there a little bit, but there's a lot of depth for him to get through in order to get some real playing time. I would say those, even though there's the gentleman named Nolan Smith lurking there as well. I just think there's more dudes for him to have to climb over in the class in order to get some real playing time.
Let me follow up on two of the names that you just mentioned real briefly. Daniel and Dean, I'll try to do these kind of separately here for a moment. Let me start with Daniel. Is the thought on Daniel much like it is Johnson, the fact that he's a little older, kind of been around the block a little bit more, Georgia unique to even take a junior college defensive back? They presumably wouldn't take Daniel unless they thought he had a chance to play right away. Is that kind of your thinking on why you would include him as quickly in a list as you did?
Well, I'm going to check a lot of boxes with Daniel really fast. Number one, he's older. You're talking about a 19, 20-year-old kid rather than a kid out of high school. He's also just looks the part, man. He's about 6 feet. He's about 195, 190, really good. Really fast. He checks off all the physical measures as well. He's the type of guy, having played 2 years already of junior college ball, having been thrown into the fire as a true freshman in junior college ball as well. I don't think Georgia recruits a guy like that unless they think he can start. And then a guy like DeAndre Baker is opening up a spot in the secondary as well. I think all those things combined with the early enrollment, the kid is really, really fast. He's really good at his position. I think that's probably the big sell there for Daniel. And then the thing with Jermaine Johnson, if you want to put a list of names together, Brandon, because this is kind of the listicle season, I guess, for doing that, the most likely Bulldogs to jump. We'll know really a lot of good stuff about Jermaine Johnson, about jumping to the NFL. The most likely Bulldogs to be, this might be their last season in Athens. I don't know if Jermaine Johnson might not crack that list by the time September, October rolls around, because 6'6", 250, I mean, he looks the part of a jaw-dropping NFL physical specimen already. He's another guy, very mature body, very athletic guy. I think all those traits will help you play early at Georgia, even on this stacked roster.
So let me follow up on the Dean thing you mentioned a moment ago, Nakobe Dean, and obviously I like Nakobe Dean a lot too, but just for the purposes of conversation, let me play devil's advocate for a moment, because while the departure of DeAndre Baker opens the door for someone to step in at defensive back, that gives DJ Daniel a chance to do that, you can make a case that the competition at inside linebacker right now is very deep. Monty Rice is a veteran who's played a good bit. Guys like Channing Tindall and presumably even Quay Walker are ready to step into expanded role. They've been on campus for a full year now. Isn't it pretty crowded for Nakobe Dean to make too much hay as an inside linebacker?
Nope, I wouldn't say at all. I think Nakobe Dean's the guy that's going to take some dude's job if they slip, if they don't get better, because I know Nakobe Dean. I have little doubt in my mind that Nakobe Dean will handle all of the mental aspects of his position. To me, it's more of just basically the physical fit and dealing with the grind of college football a little bit. Now, listen, Brandon, I wish you could have been there. And when we get around to trotting out our next generation stories on all these guys later this year, early spring, maybe after spring, we'll really be able to tell those. But Nakobe Dean, I want to take you back to Montgomery, Alabama. This is in mid-December when he is in the throes of making that decision. And Kobe Dean is basically there for day 1, day 2 of practice, going through installs, and he is driving the Mississippi offense crazy because he already understands their offense within a day and a half. John Rice Plumlee would tell me these stories about how in the world is the inside linebacker making a play or getting in my face on a screen, especially from the will linebacker spot. And it's because that Kobe is sitting there. He knows what he's supposed to be doing. There's a lot of Jake Fromm elements to his story a little bit for this position. He knows what he's supposed to be doing, but then he's looking and he's watching a tight end. He's watching a running back. He's watching the stance and the knuckles of the offensive lineman, and he is diagnosing the play pre-snap. And he's able to get in guys' faces. I think he made 3 interceptions during one 7-on-7 practice period. And, folks, the Kobe Dean's forte at Georgia will not be making interceptions. But what he does there and the way he plays the game, and then he combined that with all the physical elements, about 6 feet tall, 220 pounds, rock solid, strong in the weight room already, tireless worker, wants to get better every day. And, Brandon, I successfully went through an entire 36-second depiction of Kobe Dean without naming the middle linebacker for the Chicago Bears. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to do. But obviously when it comes to that position, even if we don't say Roquan Smith's name out loud, he's the one that's on all of our minds, just given the success in 2017 and that desire from a Georgia fan's perspective to see another Roquan emerge at that position. It sounds like whether we want to give that kind of hype to Dean or not, it sounds like he's going to have some of those expectations when he gets on the field for Georgia. Let me transition to the other side of the ball for a moment. You wrote again this week about the 4-star quarterback commit Carson Beck, and this comes after he speaks to a local television station down there in Jacksonville. Now, Jeff, you know me, and you know I can't help myself when it comes to even the hint that Beck may have used Florida to gain more favor with Georgia and get that coveted UGA offer that apparently he really wanted. Obviously, I love that, and I love poking at Florida on that subject. But beyond just that part of it and the fun theatrics for someone like me, getting a chance to hear an extended conversation with Beck, and I know you'll have your own discussions with him coming up in the weeks and months ahead, but getting a chance to hear more of his own thoughts about how his recruitment has played out up to this point. What do you make of where things are right now, and what do you make of him putting this into his own words?
Well, first of all, I got a redirect question for you, Brandon, because I do consider you to be an authority on the college football fan's mind and that psychosis maybe that go along with that. Is it possible to be a dream school for Georgia and Florida? Is that possible unless your mom or dad moves with a radical move somewhere in your upbringing? Is that really possible in your mind?
Listen, I won't presume to know what's in the hearts and minds of these young people. This young crowd's different. You know, they see these games on Saturday every single Sunday, and they fall they fall in love with different teams from week to week. And I see this with my own son, who's 7. It's like every week he's talking about some other new team and some other new sport. So I would say that the fandom of the younger generation is a little more fickle than it was for you and me when we were back in that same age. So, who am I to judge if he wants to say he likes both Georgia and Florida? Who am I to judge, Jeff?
So, quick
I will say there's a chance that my answer to that question is a little different given the fact that he's committed to Georgia than it would be if he was committed to Florida. I'll just say it that way.
Goodness gracious. What if young Adams in the Adams household grows up to be a Florida fan? I don't know. Would that be possible, Brandon? That would be like some soap opera style irony. If your son, of all young men growing up in the state of Georgia, ends up being a Florida fan, maybe because he sees that new documentary with Team Tebow and he's just enthralled. But would that be a
hold on now. I got to respond to that. My young son, even at a tender age, is smart enough to know that if he wants to sleep indoors, there's going to be no talking about the lousy stinking Gators in our household.
Because I have some experience in this because I've worked in Alabama for about 8 years, and I was around friends and neighbors who, in some situations, the extreme passion for the Tide turned the offspring into Tigers or vice versa. So it's very interesting that situation where we would have the young man sleeping outdoors. Man, that's how it would roll in the Adams household, right?
Yeah, listen, I tolerate a lot of sports, I guess, polygamy, kind of wandering around and cheering for different teams. But that's the one thing in my household we are going to draw the line on.
Very well said,
That's the
sir.
one thing where I'm going to do the old school dad thing of my house, my rules. That's the one thing that we're going to draw that line on, at least when it comes to sports.
So Brandon's going to go, you sleep under my roof, you eat my groceries, you come to the dinner table. You're going to go Jeff's creme brulee on the young man if he starts thinking about Florida in that way, huh?
That's exactly right, because if Florida starts beating Georgia too much, we're going to have to move into a smaller house.
Funny.
All right, let me finish your thoughts on Beck, because I do want to hear what you had to say about that.
Yeah, some things about Beck. People will find it strange to get their arms around it, but he was initially committed to Florida to play baseball. He's given up baseball. He's going to be at G-Day. That's what I've heard. Pretty good accord on that one. And he's already started to kind of work for the class. I think, the Darnell Washington thing was early, but now he's reaching out to a lot more guys, trying to be that Pied Piper type that I guess all quarterbacks have to be. So that's very interesting. The other things with Beck is like he's mostly, he plays 7-on-7 down there in Florida. That's something to track with a specific team. But he's already done his Under Armour camp. He's already done his opening camp. He's going to go out to the Elite 11 and the Nike opening out in Texas. So maybe some of those appearances for Carson Beck might be at a spring practice for the Bulldogs. It will definitely be at G-Day for the Bulldogs. So, there's so many similarities there. Now you can also say, like our man behind the glass, Connor Riley, outlined earlier this week. Now you can both say true dream school guys with Georgia. They both played baseball. They both committed to Georgia on March the 3rd. They're both seen as that thinking man, cerebral quarterback for the Bulldogs and everything else. So that's the type of guy already that's going to endear himself to a lot of Georgia fans, because Carson Beck, he's a really big talent, guys. For those that want to feel proud and to tout the future of the Georgia quarterback room, dropping Carson Beck back into the mix at Georgia will definitely move the dial for all those future ESPN quarterback room future power ratings, because Georgia, again, is absolutely loaded at quarterback when Carson Beck joins the fold.
So let me change the subject here for a moment. I love your piece at DawgNation this week with Dwight McGlothlin, and I couldn't help but laugh in reading it because, listen, I like following the tea leaves and stuff like this. He goes to a school, Trinity in Texas, that Georgia's done some pretty good work in over the last couple of years, both in terms of Lewis Cine, who just signed, and maybe laying some foundation with some other players in that program. He's related to Maurice Smith, Georgia's MVP on the defensive side of the ball, going back to 2016. I mean, it seems like Georgia gets some ready-made connections when it comes to McGlothlin, does it not?
Yeah, it does, and that's one of those situations where I thought his interview, and this is kind of what I try to do, because everybody sometimes is like, hey, Jeff, write a little bit less. You write too much. How can you write too much about that kid? Why don't you break it up into multiple posts? But, within that post on McGlothlin, you can kind of see threads where McGlothlin gave a pretty good read into the mind of Lewis Cine already. I also thought it was fascinating. It was one of those sections I couldn't just chop out for length, because he gave some really strong insight into the Georgia mindset right now. And the term, I know Brandon's got to get used to it, the term natty is very much a thing. It is a goal around that campus in Athens. The boys talk natty, the boys work for natties, and everyone has a clear purpose about winning a national title. That's the directive. Get on that train. If not, you're kind of lost on the orbit bus around North Campus. And with everything with McGlothlin, he loves that. He's a confident guy. Already compares Georgia to Bama. He sees Georgia and Bama in similar pole positions in college football. And without winning those big games everybody wants to win, it is another example. Here's a kid from Texas, a well-connected, high-profile recruit that thinks Georgia is definitely at the big table of college football right now.
So when we close out our conversation in a minute, I'm going to ask you about something completely off the radar of what we would normally discuss. But one more thing kind of very much in the radar we typically discuss. You've had some good stuff the last few days, whether it be a written piece about Mitchell Mays, the four-star offensive lineman from North Carolina. We highlighted him on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger this past Wednesday. John Young, another very interesting name kind of in that offensive line conversation. I was hoping you might take Young and Mays and guys already in the fold like Broderick Jones. Would you mind just kind of setting the table for what 2020 offensive line recruiting for Georgia is going to kind of look like? I know you've really rung the bell a lot about Georgia's needed offensive tackle, but with the names that we've recently been seen profiled at DawgNation and what's already in the fold, just kind of give us a little brief thumbnail of 2020 offensive line recruiting for a moment.
Yeah, so one name you're not going to hear about a lot is Andrew Rain, nation's number 3 guard out of Oklahoma, Under Armour All-American. Oklahoma is supposed to be the school for him, but right now that Sam Pittman connection is trending really hard for him. He's going to keep Georgia among his officials. He just has great interaction there for him. That's a name that doesn't pop up a lot of reporting. We spoke to him at the Future 50, and it seems like Georgia's going to be in that thing as well. Mitchell Mays is a guy Georgia sees as a Swiss Army knife across the offensive line. Can play every one of the positions, can even snap. His best spots there would go tackle first, then guard, then center. And the same thing goes for John Young. These are the interchangeable pieces that Georgia's trying to find. Really what they want to find is they want to get that dominant left tackle. Broderick Jones, folks, is that guy. Broderick Jones, folks, him going into Georgia, I feel as confident about him doing amazing things at Georgia. And everybody says, hey, Jeff, you use the word amazing too much. Broderick Jones is going to make a name for himself at Georgia. I'm as high on him as maybe a handful of guys that Georgia has gotten committed and signed heading into the program over the last 3 or 4 years. What they want to find after that is another tackle, and then maybe 2 more guys that can do a lot of things. I'm going to call those the Cade Mazers. Cade Mazers is a guy that can stabilize the line and play very well at multiple positions, can play at a high all-SEC level at multiple positions, especially by their sophomore and junior season. Mitchell Mays is one of those guys. John Young is one of those guys. Broderick Jones, folks, is really, everybody uses the term next Roquan Smith a little bit too much. You're looking for the next starting offensive tackle at the University of Georgia, kind of in that Andrew Thomas mold. Broderick Jones is that guy. So I think Georgia takes about 4 offensive linemen in this class. Looks like they've got a name right there, obviously, in Broderick Jones. Who are going to be the other guys that join? The other one to think about, and I probably should have mentioned him about 19 seconds ago, was Tate Ratledge out of Rome. Tate Ratledge is another guy for the Bulldogs. It was very interesting how he's got Tennessee family connections, and it was always maybe Georgia and Alabama for the longest time. But now Alabama has lost Brent Key. Brent Key is now the offensive line recruiter and associate head coach for Georgia Tech on the flats. And I think Georgia has really took advantage of that situation. Tate Ratledge is definitely a name to know for the class as well.
All right, I've kept you long, and I apologize. Let me squeeze in one final question on just a totally different subject, but I am kind of curious to get your thoughts on this. Are you in any way interested in seeing Aaron Murray versus Mettenberger this weekend in that AAF game? Mettenberger's the Memphis quarterback. Murray and now is going to start for Atlanta. Should have been starting the entire time. They're going to go up this weekend. Jeff, just the thought of those two head-to-head brings back really a lot of interesting and good memories for me. The good memory of the 2013 Georgia-LSU game, which was so much fun. One of the great atmospheres in Sanford Stadium history when Murray outdueled Mettenberger that day. It also, brings to mind the interesting point of, I have to admit, and this is the wrong opinion now, but at the time when Mettenberger was on the Georgia roster and he and Murray were battling for that quarterback job, I do have to admit, Jeff, if you go back then, I was on Team Zach. I kind of wanted Mettenberger to be the quarterback of the future for Georgia before he got into the off-field stuff and everything like that. But I loved the way that Mettenberger threw the ball. I remember the big throw he had, I believe it was Derontavius Wooten on G-Day those years ago, and that was enough for me to be sold. It's kind of a walk back memory lane with Mettenberger and Murray this weekend. Is that on your radar at all?
Well, first of all, that is, to me, is shocking news, Brandon. If I had to put together your ink blot test about recruiting profiles and the guys you go after, now this is all wanting to make sense. You want the guy that's the innovative, the ceiling pusher at the position, the guy with the big arm, the guy with the big size. You're one of those guys that probably would have drafted Ryan Leaf really high.
I probably would have.
You like that bigger, newer thing, right?
I probably would have. I did like that big arm on Mettenberger. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, it worked out great because Aaron Murray's an all-time great quarterback, but at the time, I was pro-Mettenberger, I have to admit.
Well, here's what the AAF needs to do. When you mentioned that matchup, to me, that screams if it's raining outside and I can't go hit golf balls, then, yeah, I want to watch Mettenberger versus Murray. I think the AAF needs to be a television sport first before it becomes a spectator sport. Maybe that's the long-term health of that league. But to me, although that's great and it's a nice little check-down Georgia quarterback room history story, which was portal guys before the portal was cool, I'd like to see the matchup. Now, one of those that might move the dial for me would be if Tebow was in this league and it was Murray versus Tebow, and you had a team with maybe more Georgia guys on it than just Damian Swann and Aaron Murray versus a team of a lot of Gators. I think that one would be more interesting for me, and rather than purely a Mettenberger Aaron Murray duel.
Fair enough, but don't forget to give credit to our buddy Cameron Nislek, who's really been booming it for the Atlanta team as punter. I've loved seeing Cam have so much success there.
You know, it's great, but Cam's so good, and he's a good dude, and he's so good at what he does, but it kind of reverses your thought process because you're supposed to be a little bit miffed when the Atlanta team or the in-state team punts. But then he's so good at what he does, it's almost fun watching Cam get hang time in his own way.
That is a really good point. Jeff, thanks for spending some extra time with us here on this Friday. Really fun conversation. We know you got some great stuff coming up in the days ahead at DawgNation.com. And for the people who were curious what we were saying off the top of the program, Tuesday for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, we'll show some of the fun we had at Marlowe's this past week, including me with a blowtorch in my hand. That'll be fun on Tuesday.
Brandon, true confession here, true serum question. Have you worn the white Marlowe's Tavern chef's coat around your home in sort of an authority pose around the Adams family?
Absolutely. I told my kids they had to call me Chef Daddy from now on. They were very confused about that.
Guilty of that as well. That was a very fun time, man.
All right, we'll talk to you later, Jeff. Have a good weekend.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, good stuff, fun stuff from Jeff Sentell. Love having that conversation every Friday. And, yeah, I got to say I'm looking forward to Murray versus Mettenberger. I have not been the biggest AAF fan up to this point in time, but now that Murray's playing a little bit more, there's a good chance I'll probably watch a lot more of those games. Really excited to see that. And I was also mentioning, by the way, speaking of quarterbacks, also coming out in about 5 minutes from right now, we'll say hello to another great former Georgia quarterback, David Greene, joining us for the first time in a long time here on DawgNation Daily. And we'll talk about the Tailgate Apparel when he joins us. Don't forget, I got the Tailgate Apparel sweatshirt on right now. You can go to the DawgNation Instagram feed, and you can see the post right there in the DawgNation bio as well with the link to the sweatshirt that I'm wearing. If you need one for yourself or a gift coming up in the very near future, Tailgate Apparel is going to take good care of you on that. Speaking of my kids, also, I was talking about them with Jeff a good bit. One of the things that's really funny about my family is we love real milk from Georgia dairy cows. We go through gallons of this stuff every single week. I put it in my coffee. My kids just drink it, with every meal. They drink it in snacks. We're just huge, huge fans of real milk from Georgia dairy cows. And there's an event coming up at Kroger that's made for us, but I think it's going to be really fun for you and your family as well. It's coming up at the Alpharetta Kroger on State Bridge Road. The date to remember on this Saturday, March 16th. It's next Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The Georgia Mobile Dairy Classroom, and by the way, if you're watching a video, you can see an example of this, is going to be there. Dairy cows, you can pet them, you can interact with them, get your picture taken, whatever. But also, it's important to remember when it comes to real milk from Georgia dairy cows, not only can you drink that, it tastes great, but a lot of the great food that we love is actually made using this real milk, and there are going to be a lot of Georgia chefs on hand cooking a lot of these recipes, including, how about this, peach-stuffed French toast. You got to have milk for that. Creamy Parmesan pancetta pasta, same way. And listen, milkshakes as well. And as much as I love milk, I really love milkshakes too. It's all from real milk made from Georgia dairy cows. Tastes so good. Go to this website, milkonmymind.com. It's milkonmymind.com for more information with the big event at the Alpharetta Kroger on State Bridge Road next Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right, before we get David Greene coming up here in just a moment, let me hit a couple of SEC stories, and I'm going to be a little unfair to LSU here for a moment because, honestly, when we talk about Georgia this offseason, there's also a lot of talk from a lot of fans about changes to the offense. But I saw where Ed Orgeron, as the Tigers get ready to begin their spring practice, was once again also talking about changes to the offense. And from Orgeron's perspective, this is because Joe Brady, who's been with the New Orleans Saints as a employee, kind of one of those analyst type things the last couple of years, comes over and now is going to help generate the LSU pass game this year. But how many years in a row is this of LSU talking about new offense, whether it be Steve Ensminger being added as offensive coordinator a year ago, Matt Canada being added as offensive coordinator the year before that, all the promises of Cam Cameron's era the year before that. This seems like the conversation we have around the SEC every single spring, LSU looking to change up its offense and find more passing game. I do think this year, though, there's a chance that Orgeron's words aren't necessarily going to ring quite as hollow. Let's face it, Joe Burrow is coming back for an additional year. I think that experience for him matters. I think LSU's got a crop of really impressive veteran wide receivers and a couple really good-looking freshman running backs. I actually think this year on offense, LSU might not be that bad. And Joe Brady coming over to help work the passing game, maybe he's going to be a part of that too. This is something LSU's spoken about a lot in recent years, but in this particular instance, Orgeron might not be wrong. I also saw on Twitter from five-star wide receiver Raheem Jarrett's Twitter feed that he's apparently planning on visiting Tennessee this weekend. That in and of itself is not that big of a deal. These prospects are taking all kinds of visits this time of year. We follow the visits, but not every visit means a whole lot. This doesn't mean that Jarrett's going to Tennessee, but it does bring to mind for me T. Martin. And I've said this before. When you really look at the changes that were made to the Tennessee coaching staff over this offseason, as big of a deal as Derek Ansley is moving to defensive coordinator, and that's going to impact Tennessee recruiting, the issue with T. Martin and his ability to go out and find elite offensive recruits, how successful Jeremy Pruitt's going to end up eventually being, I think the T. Martin recruitment, one way or another, for the good or for the bad, is going to determine how successful it ends up being. You probably saw where LSU basketball coach Will Wade is in a ton of trouble. He's allegedly been caught on, I guess, tape, offering to pay a player to come to LSU. One way or another, that's probably not going to end up being that good. And to follow up on a story from the other day, it is now official. Florida and Miami are moving up their season opener a week. They'll begin well early to start the 2019 season. Let's talk to David Greene right now. And back here on DawgNation Daily, it's always fun to get a chance to say hello to the great former Georgia quarterback David Greene, a good friend of our program here, and it's good to have him back on the program. And in just a couple of minutes, I'll remind you how you can get a link to the sweatshirt that I'm wearing today, courtesy of our friends at Tailgate Apparel. But first, David, welcome back to the program. I hope you've been doing well over the course of this long, cold off season.
Well, Brandon, it's good to be back, man. It's been a while since we've talked. I know it was, I guess, right for the last bowl game.
Yeah.
And good to catch up, and glad, heck, it's football already here for spring ball again, ready to get geared back up.
Yeah, I can't wait to be in Athens for G-Day and the start of spring practice here pretty soon. I'm ready for that. And it's been kind of fun kind of watching what's been going on in the program over the last couple of weeks, too. And you probably saw, Georgia got a quarterback commitment, Carson Beck, a really good-looking prospect, a guy that looks a lot like Jake Fromm. But in thinking about that, is it hard for you to believe that we're already now talking about the possible replacement for Jake Fromm? I mean, it seemed like we just, blink your eyes, and Fromm was himself a senior in high school down there in Warner Robins, and now he's going into his third year. Who knows what happens after this? Maybe he moves on the NFL draft. Isn't it funny how quick time passes when it comes to these college eligibilities, yours and a lot of these other Georgia guys who've come after you as well?
It's amazing, Brandon, how fast things change. It used to be, heck, even when I was playing this 15 years ago, guys would come in, they typically redshirt a year and kind of get the, get familiar with the offense and the whole deal and the speed of the game. Now guys are coming in, they're ready to play, they're ready to make a difference. And it's amazing how fast things are changing. Justin Fields comes in, then he's back out, and chances that he's going to be starting at Ohio State. It's such a fast pace. The game's changed dramatically. Georgia fans, we got to pinch ourselves. It's pretty amazing what Fromm has been able to do since he's been our quarterback. Taking us to the national championship as a true freshman, and just really the way he's handled himself and represented himself in the school at the quarterback position. Well, we've been pretty fortunate because he's been a consistent player for us.
You mentioned back in the year 2000, Jim Donovan's last year, when you were at Georgia, you were a true freshman, you sat as a redshirt. That was common back then. As you pointed out, that's not quite as common today. But I'm guessing you think there's still some value in what you learn by watching. And for a guy like Beck, who presumably will watch Jake Fromm for a year and then maybe have a chance to compete with a guy like Dwan Mathis and others for the starting job after that, I'm guessing you would say there's still some value in what you can learn from standing on the sidelines for a year. People obviously want to play, and you love competitors that want to be on the field, but sometimes there's something to be gained by not quite jumping on the field quite so soon, right?
Yeah, and I'll say from the quarterback position, it's not really as much physical as it is mental. I mean, it's processing where you got to get to and where you're going to distribute the ball in a very short period of time. And look, I could tell last year just sitting in the stands, I mean, there's no question Fields, from a talent standpoint, is off the chart. But I could sit in the stands and realize that the game was still coming a little fast for him. I mean, he was having a hard time processing things. And if the number one receiver wasn't open, it was a little bit more of a challenge to get to 2 and 3 in a short period of time. And so it's really it's the mental gymnastics of just going through it. It just takes a lot of reps and a lot of time to go through it. It's pretty amazing when you see some of these young guys that can come in and make an impact on their team. Because I know guys physically are capable of doing, but it's really impressive when I see a guy mentally be able to make those steps and those jumps as quick as they do.
So kind of on a similar vein, when you look at Jake Fromm, who is going into his 3rd year, he'll be entrenched as the junior starter for Georgia. When you went from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, how much easier did the game get? How much more comfortable did you get, not just with what Coach Richt and the offense was looking for you to do, but just comfort with SEC defenses, being on the field? Did it get easier? Did the game slow down as you moved into year 3 and year 4 as the Georgia starter?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, the first year, I get up under center and all I can see is the middle linebacker, because I'm just kind of narrow and your vision's just right there. But as you come up and you play a little bit longer, you can see everything coming. I mean, you can see the corner start to cheat, and if you see the safety cheating over, you're thinking, okay, I think I'm going to have a corner blitz here. You can see that stuff when you get a little bit older, a little bit smarter. You understand defenses a little bit more, and that's so much of it. It's just understanding what defenses are trying to do to you. And the more knowledge you have, the faster you can play. And that's ultimately what you're trying to get to, is you want guys just to be able to react and just play football and just arm them with enough knowledge to where they can go out there and just cut it loose, because you gotta react. These plays are only a couple seconds long.
Sure. At the NFL Scouting Combine last week, DawgNation caught up with a few of the former Georgia players who were on hand, and those guys like looking back on their time at Georgia and maybe looking at what's next for the Dogs as well. And one of the things that comes up from Isaac Nada, Terry Godwin, some different folks talked about this, I guess maybe Hardman a little bit too, the new wrinkles, at least in their mind, that James Coley's going to bring as offensive coordinator. Jim Chaney's gone. He's at Tennessee now. It's James Coley who'll be calling the plays for Georgia on the offense. And a lot of those guys seem to think that Coley may bring in some new wrinkles and add some new stuff to the overall play card for Georgia. How much of that do you think is needed, and how much of that would you like to see personally, David?
Well, I'll say this. I think Chaney did a good job of calling plays for the most part. The one thing that we're fortunate in Georgia, we are loaded with talent everywhere. We got a big offensive line, bigger than it's ever been, more athletic than it's ever been. We got a phenomenal quarterback. We got great running backs and really talented receivers. So there's a lot that there's a lot of different things you can design. And what I would love to see is just an explosive offense. Something where it's not just vanilla type football. I think we're always going to be, and Kirby has been pretty outspoken about it. He wants to be a smash mouth run, first type team. But there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. And when you line up in different sets and do different things, you can catch teams off guard a little bit where they don't know exactly the way you're going to attack them, and just trying to keep from being predictable. And we're fortunate we got a very smart quarterback. We got a lot of really, really talented guys, and an offensive coordinator's job is you got great talent. How are you going to put them in positions to be successful? So I'm excited. From what I'm hearing, I think he's got a pretty aggressive style to him, and sometimes when you got an aggressive style with really talented players, it can get really fun.
I was thinking about this. We were just talking about the excitement about spring football coming up, and you talked about what James Coley might be on the field and what Jake Fromm might be in year 3. Get you looking forward to the start of the season, the fall as well. And for someone like you that enjoys traveling back to Athens and being part of these game day environments, how much more fun does it make it for you knowing that this year, for kind of the first time in a while, Georgia has a really exciting home schedule? It's teams like Notre Dame, which has never been to Athens before for a game, Texas A&M, which hasn't been in a really long time, predating their arrival in the SEC. How much more fun does it make it for you getting excited about the season, knowing that if you look at that season ticket with those home games this year, you've actually got a lot of really interesting games on there? Does it make it more fun for you?
As no doubt. Last couple of years we've had a pretty lean home schedule. And just looking at the team, the excitement, I mean, the talent that's in Athens right now, and what's possible. I think so many Georgia fans are excited because just winning an SEC championship, yeah, that's great, but we're at a point now where those kinds of things are expected. And we want to win a national championship. We want to be in the playoffs. We got a coach that's hungry, that's doing all the right things, and there's a lot of things that got to fall into place for that to happen. But the excitement in the fall on Saturday in Athens is always off the charts. But knowing you got teams like Notre Dame coming to town, some interesting rivalries, it's going to make this fall a lot of fun.
All right, David, before we let you go, I know you're as big a fan of tailgate apparel in downtown Athens as I am, and every time I wear one of these tailgate apparel sweatshirts, people are always saying, BA, where did you get that? And so I wanted you to spend a minute, if you don't mind, kind of reminding folks that, listen, not only these things look good, but they also are very comfortable as well. On these cold, windy days we've had as of late, how much fun have you had throwing on one of these tailgate apparel sweatshirts to kind of keep you warm and toasty? It's the right thing to do this time of year, is it not?
There's no doubt about it, Brandon. I'm probably going to have to run by the store and buy me some more here shortly, because as cold as it's been and as wet and rainy as it's been for the last couple months, I think I've just about worn mine out already. But no, it's great apparel. I tell you what's been fun is I've worked with them since the beginning, since they came to Athens, and it's fun, especially this last fall, just seeing how many people now, when I go to Athens, go to games, are actually wearing their shirts and sweatshirts and that kind of deal. They got some really good stuff, and I mean, every time I walk in there, my wife kind of takes my wallet from me because it could be pretty dangerous. It could be a dangerous place.
I want to try to make it easy for the people who are watching right now, because I do get a lot of people in our comment section that ask me about the sweatshirt that I'm wearing. If you go to the DawgNation page on Instagram, that's just @DawgNation on Instagram. If you find the DawgNation Instagram page, we've got a link to Tailgate Apparel where you can actually get the sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now, and this is not only a great personal item, but it's also a really fun gift as well. So please check out DawgNation on Instagram. You can find the link to the sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now, and of course that's always a lot of fun to have this time of year. David, it's also always a lot of great fun to have a conversation with you. We appreciate you being a part of it with us today on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to catching up with you again soon, and thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate it, Brandon, man. You have a good one.
Really fun stuff to be able to have David Greene here on DawgNation Daily. I always love getting his thoughts on the upcoming season, what he sees from the Georgia quarterbacks, Jake Fromm included, and boy, can't wait for spring practice, as he said. Can't wait to be with all of you there in Athens for G-Day. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure you'll check out Tailgate Apparel when you are there, but I hope you'll check us out as well. We'll be out and about, and can't wait to talk to you a lot more about spring practice as we get closer to that. Let me also say, it's good news to be able to say this on a Friday, 860. That's what we're up to on our Gator Hater Updater. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll keep doing this every single day between now and the time they play again, and then after that, we'll do it again for a whole other year after that. It's fun to have the Gator Hater Updater right here on DawgNation Daily. Huge thanks to Jeff Sintel today as well. Really good recruiting information for him. Hope all of you are getting ready to enjoy a great weekend. We appreciate you making this a fun week on DawgNation Daily, and we'll see you right back here on Monday. Talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down as we get ready to cool down in style after being kind of heated up a lot during the show in a number of topics. We'll look forward to diving into everything else going on with your own thoughts right now. And as we transition to that, I'll also quickly remind you to make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Heating, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning, all of that stuff. We're around here at DawgNation Daily. We would only trust R.S. Andrews to work on that for us because their techs are cleaned and screened and trained. They show up on time. They really do only the work that's promised, and I know for many of you, this is also a price thing, too. When someone comes in your house and does work in your house, it can be a little nerve-wracking. How much is this going to cost me? What's this going to be? And sometimes this stuff with other companies has a tendency to spiral out of control. R.S. Andrews, that's not going to be the case. They do the work that's promised at the price that y'all talk about up front. They're not going to be any surprises. That's why you like R.S. Andrews, so check them out online, rsandrews.com. Now, with your comments, and boy, this is as late as we've started the R.S. Andrews School Down in quite some time. I've got 11:06. This is a kind of a late start to the R.S. Andrews School Down. Apparently, we went very long with Jeff today on the program, but nonetheless, it's good to be out here in the program today. John Snook says, B.A., when are you going to come to Utah? I'd love to do a DawgNation invasion of Utah at some point. My wife's been to Utah a little bit. She says it's beautiful out there. So I've never been to the Beehive State, but I'd love to go at some point in time. Jamie Bailey says you started the show late today. Yeah, we kind of did, I guess, Jamie. Thanks for, as Clark Griswold says, thanks for noticing. But we are going to try to get back on a earlier, more normal start time on that. That's really my fault. I've been dragging my feet a little bit, so I'll try to do a little bit better with that. And coming up on Monday, we'll also get back to doing our Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaways. We were so busy with everything else going on today, we didn't really have time to do that, but we're not going to give up on that. We're going to keep doing those, and for the people who won this week, I'll be in touch really soon to talk to you more about that. For sure. Brian Kephart says we're really blessed with the health and durability of Fromm. Yeah, he's been good in that regard, and I'm sure that he'll continue that way in 2019 as well. John Adams says, I'd like that opening spot Florida got in the future to start a season. I see that spot used yearly to start a season with a good game. So, John, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when this first came about. I don't know why this doesn't sound that good to me, but it kind of doesn't. And, in general, I'm such a big college football fan that expanding the season, making it longer, just seems like the kind of thing I would easily be in favor of. The issues I had with this initially were that it started out being planned on, the typical opening week, kind of like that last Saturday in August or first Saturday into September, depending on how the dates fall. And then it gets changed, not really at the last minute, but certainly after it had been scheduled for a different date for quite some time. And it seemed like a money grab, like the experiment of let's see how football does do in late summer, and let's see if people take to this. For something about August 24th or the 23rd, whatever date it is, I think it's August 24th, something about that date feels like the summertime to me. And this doesn't even make sense to me because I love college football. I wish the season was 52 weeks long. I don't know why something about this doesn't quite feel right, but I'm not as enthusiastic about this as probably I should be. I agree with the commenter, though, that it's probably the kind of thing that if this goes well, it'll become a marquee game for somebody in years forward. And no matter what ESPN says, that's the truth. This is an experiment to see how the game does. They can say, well, this is all about the 150th anniversary of college football. But if the ratings are through the roof, they'll start doing this every single year, and it'll be, one big game, and then 10 years from now it'll be 15 games. So that's the way this is going to go. I don't know why I'm such a Scrooge about this, but I'm not that excited about college football moving up that early. As I said, this just kind of still feels like the summer. I mean, there's no telling how hot it'll be in late August in I think it's Orlando where the game's going to be played. There's no telling how hot it'll be. Brian Kephart says, going back to the Marlowe scene, he says, be honest, that wasn't the first time with a torch in your hand. Someone's been doing some wood-burning project or something. I'd give anything if I was better with equipment like that. Let me tell you who else would be very happy about that. My wife would be, too. Truth is, anytime it comes to anything like that's industrial equipment or anything like that, I'm kind of all thumbs. So I'm glad to know that you were impressed, but that's not typically the thing I do. Ninja the Noob asks a good question. Are you looking forward to the Notre Dame game or the Texas A&M game more? Like most things with Notre Dame, I think the Georgia-Notre Dame game is actually already a little bit overhyped. The truth is, Georgia's going to be a significant favorite in that game. I don't think it's ever going to be close. Georgia fans aren't going to relinquish their ticket to Irish fans, so I don't know that game ever quite feels the way that people want it to feel. It's kind of cool that a big non-conference team is coming in and no doubt will soak up the preseason hype. But the real game, I believe, could eventually be Georgia versus Texas A&M because, as I've said before, I do think the Aggies are going to be pretty good. And as unique as it is to play non-conference Notre Dame in September, it's, in terms of unusual nature of the scheduling, to play a top 10 SEC team not named Auburn in late November in Athens is really just as weird. Now, of course, Texas A&M has to truly prove to be that good for that to happen. But the truth is, given the unusual nature of that scheduling, that's actually just as weird as the Notre Dame thing. So if you give me the binary choice of one or the other, I'm going to take Texas A&M, but admittedly I'm excited about both of them. Connor Riley joins us.
And I'm here to tell you why Notre Dame is the game you should really be looking forward to.
Please, by all means, go ahead.
So the Notre Dame game is undoubtedly going to be the biggest game of the week in college football that week, given that it's a non-conference game in Week 4. If I had to bet, it's probably going to be a CBS 3:30 game just because they simply never get Notre Dame, and I'm sure they'd like a piece of that pie.
Is that the rule? Because it's the Georgia home game, does that open it up to CBS? Is that the way it works?
It opens it up to SEC scheduling rules, which is why Notre Dame home games are on NBC, but when you see Notre Dame on like ESPN, it's because they're in a road game.
Because doesn't the NFL work the opposite, where it's the away team that triggers a CBS or a Fox deal?
Yes. So Notre Dame's probably going to enter that game undefeated, even though we don't really know how good they are. They lost a lot of talented guys to the NFL this year, especially on defense.
Some of us have a suspicion about how good they really are, but go ahead.
With Texas A&M, you think Clemson's going to be very good next year, right?
I would think so, yes.
And I want to preface this, you think Auburn's going to be really good next year, right?
I think Auburn's a top 25 team. I think Auburn's a dangerous opponent. I don't know how good they are in capital letters. I think they're a threat on every single Saturday.
You think Alabama's going to be really good next year, right?
I would assume so.
There's a good chance A&M enters that Georgia game with 3 losses already. Clemson, at Clemson.
Could.
Home for Alabama, and I believe they are home for Auburn.
Could. I will say that I'll give Texas A&M at least one of those wins. And I actually think they got a decent chance of winning 2 of them.
I mean, they've never beaten Auburn at home. It's worth putting that out there.
Yeah, just they're due. They're due.
So that's why a big reason why I think we know Notre Dame is going to be a hyped game. I think there's a semi-decent chance that A&M game loses a little bit of its luster just because of who A&M has to play on the schedule before it plays Georgia.
That's a fair point. Bulldog Chris says, going to recruiting, I think we get Marshawn Lloyd and Kendall Milton. I guess if I was doing my mock class right now, I guess my mock class would probably include Lloyd and Milton. I guess that's what my mock class would probably be. That's probably what I would be. Dapper Dan also agrees with Connor that A&M's record. He says a little bit different take, that A&M's record won't make them less dangerous. Now Dan's right about that. It could diminish some of the hype for the game, but Connor brings up a fair point that when you look at the nature of the A&M schedule, given the fact that it's SEC West plus Clemson, you got to do a lot of work to remain in the top 10. But I do think that if you're going to take a wild flyer on something, A&M winning one of those big Clemson or Alabama games, that to me is not the worst flyer to take out there. Brian McPhail says UGA fans need to show up for A&M. Brian, I understand where you're coming from. I'm assuming that won't be a problem though. Rob W. says, let's be honest, BA, a lower-grade SEC team is easily a top 25 team based on the landscape of college football. Certainly in the case of Auburn, because of the veterans they're going to have on defense and the desperate nature of Malzahn trying to hold on to his job. I mean, that may enough be alone to keep him in the top 25. Let me go over here to Facebook just for a moment, too. Raymond Cox says, let me get this. He says, where did Raymond go? Why people think Auburn is good every year in preseason beyond me, 4-loss team at least. I don't know about that. I think the one thing that you got to be real careful of is when you get a guy like Derek Brown to come back for a final year, that's a big anchor in the middle of that defense. And this is still a program that's recruited fairly well. Now, if you want to say it's a 4-loss team, you're obviously going to bank on between that quartet of quarterbacks, Nix, the freshman, Willis, and Gatewood, the 2 guys that have been there, Fort Sandberg, who's as old as your grandfather, also competing in that mix. You're kind of banking on somebody not emerging from that group. Now, that could happen. There's individually reasons why all of those guys are good bet against when it comes to becoming a successful NFL quarterback, at least in 2019. But that's what it's going to take, I believe, that team to win 4 games. If they find competent quarterback play, let's do a for instance comparison for a moment. Tennessee beat Auburn last year on the field, but assuming Auburn finds any quarterback at all, Auburn is still way more talented than Tennessee. So that's kind of my thought on that. Now, I've also been guilty the last couple of off seasons of probably being a little higher on Auburn than some of you probably thought that I should be. But this is still by comparison a pretty talented deal. Matt Rukavina kind of also echoing that same sentiment. He says, BA, if Auburn has no quarterback, they don't compete 7-5, 8-4 at most, especially given the schedule they play. That's probably true. That's why I said this on the show, like the regular broadcast, I think it was yesterday, that if you're a Georgia fan, the non-Georgia storyline you probably ought to be paying the most attention to this offseason probably is who that Auburn quarterback is going to end up being. That's a really big deal for the good news for Auburn or the bad news for Georgia and the rest of the SEC if it doesn't look like they're finding one. And my guess is at the end of the spring, we still have a lot of questions about that. But, I mean, these spring games are on television, so one way or another we'll get to watch what happens. And we know you can't play 4 quarterbacks equally during a spring game, nor can you give 4 quarterbacks equal reps as the number one. So we may not know who the starter is going to be for Auburn at the end of the spring, but we'll certainly know who's eliminated. And we could be talking transfer portal for some of these guys too, by the way. Shannon Baker referencing a lot of these incoming guys for Georgia that can make impacts right away. Jermaine Johnson, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith, DJ Daniel. He says hard to say because there are so many, and I do agree with that. But I also want to reiterate what I said during the regular broadcast a few minutes ago too, that there are so many potential impact guys, and I am excited about all these, and I think in different ways for different reasons, you know, a few of these guys could be the special sauce that really allows Georgia to break through for a national championship. But the really good news for me is this is not 2018 and 2017 where if Georgia didn't get a massive freshman contribution, Georgia wasn't going anywhere. The roster is now getting deep enough where the freshmen coming in can be luxury items. They can be, ooh, it's nice to add this to what's already a fairly competent group. Whereas the last couple of seasons, if you didn't get freshman contributions, including Jordan Davis stopping the run, Jake Braun playing quarterback, last couple of seasons, if you didn't get freshman contributions, you're going to the Outback Bowl. So this Georgia team's a little different than that, and that ought to be, I think, considered good news by everybody. Scott Harris, going back to the Auburn topic, says not sure Gus Malzahn survives another average season, and that could very well be true, which, listen, I believe that cornered animals are always dangerous, and Auburn as a cornered animal, Malzahn, who's been a bit of a self-preservationist, fighting for his job, could make him a little dangerous too. I think the one problem that always kind of comes up at Auburn, and this is an interesting soap opera, that tug-of-war between what Malzahn wants his offense to be, which is one solely controlled by him, and what the offense could otherwise be with other guys at the helm. For instance, I think that Chip Lindsey's a really good coach. Lindsey's not there anymore, but the relationship with Chip Lindsey and Gus Malzahn was just as sour as it had been seemingly with Rhett Lashley before that. That, to me, is a big problem for Gus Malzahn, that he came to Auburn as this innovative offensive mind based on what offensive innovation looked like circa 2010, and he's never really added that next level to his persona. We're supposed to evolve, right? We're supposed to reinvent ourselves. And Malzahn has seemingly been unable to reinvent himself. And, I mean, our buddy Mike Johnson always said this really well, that if Malzahn steps back from the play-calling role, what value does he really have for Auburn? Because what he seemingly has not been able to do is be that CEO-style head coach. But if you're going to last, that's what you've got to become. And Kirby Smart's the same way. Right now, I get the impression, I don't know this for sure, but I get the impression that Kirby Smart's a little bit of a tinkerer on defense. That's why he's not too worried about Dan Lanning or Glenn Schumann or any of these other young guys. They're going to be in expanded roles in terms of responsibility. Kirby's still very heavily involved. But as you grow, you got to grow out of that. Nick Saban did. Nick Saban, I believe, over the course of his time, grew to trust Kirby Smart even more to, at the end of the Smart era at Alabama, I don't think that Nick Saban was quite as much of a tinker in that defense as maybe he had been in 2008. You know, Kirby Smart's got to grow into that too. I think you've seen a counterexample of where that hasn't happened. Malzahn, as still a relatively young head coach, believe it or not, even though we've been talking about it now for a number of years, has just not really grown into the next phase of head coaching, which is a true CEO that manages an organization more so than micromanages individual decisions. Todd David Brown brings up a really good point on Facebook. Can't believe we've owned Auburn 11 of the last 14 games. You're going to give Rick some credit for that too, and you do. And that's an impressive mark for Georgia. It's worth celebrating, and most Georgia fans, I think, are pretty proud of that. But it's also important to know that when you look over at Auburn, that is one of those dark clouds that hangs over that program as much as anything. I mean, you can make a case that, Auburn's actually beaten Alabama a couple times. Beat him in 2013, beat him in 2017, beat him in 2010. Some people assume they've had no success against Saban Alabama whatsoever, to the tune of collecting championships. Obviously, that's an imbalance in favor of the Crimson Tide. But there have been some head-to-head wins for Auburn against Alabama that the Auburn mark against Georgia, I think, is a real dark cloud that hangs over that program. And if Malzahn gets pushed out the door at the end of the season, what's happened against Georgia is going to be as big a reason why as anything. Kirk Warner also brings up a good point on YouTube. It's not too early to start thinking about these games, too. Auburn versus Oregon is an intriguing matchup, one of those early season non-conference games. Physical SEC team versus a finesse Pac-12 team. That is a really interesting matchup. Oregon, of course, really strong at the quarterback position. That is a good one. Now, last year, I was emphatic all offseason long that Auburn was going to handle Washington as too much travel, too much to deal with. I'm probably going to be pretty confident for Auburn against Oregon as well, although I haven't quite gotten in and crunched a lot of that kind of stuff. But Kirk's right. It's a good preseason or early season non-conference game to think about. C. Hill on YouTube says, my bold prediction for the year is that Florida loses to Vanderbilt this year. That's a fun one. They haven't played Vandy well very much. He says they play Vandy after they play us, and I think you might see the Georgia effect take place in that game. Yeah, this past year, the Georgia effect for Florida was probably the Missouri game where they didn't play very well in that game either. In Florida, you can go back and look, spanning a couple different coaches, has actually struggled a little bit against Vanderbilt. That's a pretty interesting take. I like that. Brian McPhail says possible losses for Auburn in 2019 prior to Georgia, Texas A&M, Florida, LSU. Yeah. The one thing you got to say about Auburn is historically they play a pretty tough schedule because their East crossover game is always Georgia. They typically play a decent non-conference game, and they play the SEC West. They play a really tough schedule. In fact, there have been some interesting things, numbers crunched recently about just how tough that Auburn schedule is. I can't remember the exact details, but you can't say that Auburn doesn't play a tough schedule. They have certainly played a tough one. Georgia Peach says that Vandy should have gotten the Gators last season. They should have. I'm also kind of already thinking about how big of a favorite Georgia's going to be in Nashville at Vanderbilt to open the season. My assumption is Georgia's about a 17-point favorite there in that game, something along those lines. Obviously, they could win the game by a lot more, but you don't see a lot of 20-plus point road favorites in the SEC, seemingly especially to start the season. So that line may be somewhere around 17 or so if I had to guess right now. Scott Harris asked an interesting question. He says, our coaching experience definitely took a dip this year. Will it matter? I think it's a really interesting question. At Alabama a year ago, it seemingly did matter, at least according to some of the sources within that program who've been willing to talk on the record. For Georgia, I'm kind of not really as worried about it. As I said yesterday, Kirby Smart recently really downplayed the hiring of these coordinators, saying that people like me and maybe fans, we have a tendency to overrate some of this coordinator stuff and make a bigger deal about it than it is. Sometimes Kirby says stuff just because it sounds good, frankly. But in this case, I don't think what he's saying is necessarily all wrong. I do think the overall coaching staff philosophy instilled day-to-day, week-to-week, is probably as important as who's pushing buttons on game day. And individually, I don't see anything to dislike about Schumann, Lanning, and some of the guys that we would think of as young guys. But as Kirby transitions into no longer the young kind of rookie coach into a more experienced coach, this is always the thing to deal with. How do you regenerate when you lose staffers? Because staffers are in high demand. I've said this before. It seems like there's no shortage of potential head coaches. We seem to be able to find some former Saban assistant to coach every one of these teams in the SEC. But when it comes to the 10 assistants that work for those guys, the kinds of guys that can handle the rigor on the recruiting trail, the kinds of guys that can handle the pressure that comes with fall Saturdays, there's never enough of those, so you end up passing the same pool of assistants around back and forth between the various coaches. So going out and finding the next star in the coaching industry is a big thing. And if that's a problem for Kirby in 2019, then it's likely always going to be a problem. It's always going to be the kind of thing that Georgia's going to be dealing with. You can't keep the same staff in place forever. You got to maximize your opportunity while you've got these guys, especially the ones that have been there now for a couple of years. And you've got to hope that you found some diamonds in rough. So it's a very fair question to ask. I'm assuming it won't be an on-field issue for Georgia, but it is certainly a part of the evaluation of how we look at Kirby Smart moving forward.
If that's the problem for Kirby in 2019.
Connor, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Kirby continues to build out and change his staff over the years. Especially, Saban, I think, rightly deserves a lot of credit from moving his offense from, what it was with Jim McElwain was the offensive coordinator there to, bringing in Lane Kiffin, sort of revolutionizing the way that program functioned as an offense. Because I think you'd agree. I don't think James Coley's going to be here for a long time.
I think he's on a fast track to being a head coach. He's a very sharp guy.
And if Georgia's in the college football playoff and trying to win a national championship this year, which just about all of us think they are, he might be a one-and-done guy in Georgia.
Totally could be.
So there's a good chance, Kirby's going to be looking for another new offensive coordinator again next year. And, with the way the staff turnover works with Saban, eventually you're just going to run out of guys to go from him. And given that Dabo just hasn't lost any assistants and it seems like those guys want to stay there, you have to wonder if college programs are going to start looking more and more to Kirby Smart for his assistants and guys he brings up through the ranks. It's not going to be a long time before Schumann eventually goes and gets his own shop, and the same can be said with Dan Lanning.
The other thing is, and maybe you mentioned this, maybe I just didn't hear it, is Sam Pittman's not going to do this forever either.
No.
He's, late 50s, probably 56, 57, something like that, probably. I mean, this is a guy that, as you keep paying him more money, all of a sudden the double-edged sort of that is, all of a sudden you've now paid him enough money that he can just go away if he wants to and be very happy. He seems like a fun-loving guy. He doesn't feel like the kind of guy that's going to do this until he can't walk anymore. And so right now you've got a philosophy that's in place. Big offensive lineman, running the ball behind those, play actioning off of that with a smart quarterback. That's the overall offensive philosophy that seems to be in place in Georgia. You've got this window of opportunity to strike with that. And then after that, the entire program could look pretty different in a couple of years just because, as Connor said, that's the nature of all of it. And I'm a really big believer that when it comes to defensive-minded head coach, who you hire on offense is ultimately going to determine how successful you are. I mean, offensive coaching just dominates the narrative when it comes to football. At the NFL level, that's why Cliff Kingsbury is a head coach in the NFL now, and that kind of stuff is very much a part of the college narrative as well. You can even look at these former Saban assistants who've become head coaches. Will Muschamp gets fired at Florida. Why is that? Because the Kurt Ropers and the Charlie Weisses and the offensive coordinators he tried to bring in, none of them ever really worked out. Jeremy Pruitt's under a lot of pressure at Tennessee moving into year 2, and you look to those, that he goes out and spends an exorbitant amount of money on Jim Chaney, more so than you would typically have expected a couple of years ago, because I think deep down Pruitt knows, I've got to have an offensive coordinator succeed. Otherwise, in 2 years, they're going to run me out of here, just like they did Will Muschamp down at Florida. Muschamp's kind of back in the same situation at South Carolina, where he's recruited, at least for South Carolina standards, pretty well, but they're not winning enough. And fingers get pointed at Kurt Roper once again. Now it's Brian McClendon in the mix. Dan Werner from Ole Miss gets brought in, and he's going to try to help get all that cleaned up. But once again, it's an evaluation of defensive-minded Muschamp based on the offensive coaches that he's hired. So when Coley does go on to be a head coach, and sooner rather than later he probably will be, that's the one where when Kirby finally has to go outside the program for an offensive coordinator. At that point in time, you probably do, I'm assuming.
Right.
When you go outside the program to bring in another offensive guy, that's the thing that determines, is Kirby Smart a good coach, or is he one of the all-time great coaches that gets something named after him when he leaves UGA? It's how you reboot that offense for the third time.
Now, 2 things here. One, it wouldn't surprise me a whole lot if, let's say Coley does leave after this year because Georgia goes to the college football playoff and they win it all. He's probably going to have announced that he's leaving before Georgia wins national championship, given that's just the way the college hiring cycle works. I think Del McGee would be a really interesting candidate as an offensive coordinator. Obviously, he doesn't have sort of the background that Coley does, especially with the previous experience, but it does sort of seem like he's on that trajectory, at least to be an offensive coordinator here, if not somewhere else. Because like Pittman, you just can't expect to hold on to these guys forever.
Let me say one thing about McGee, and I'll let you finish your point. The interesting thing about him is, given the fact that he's such a good recruiter, he's been a high school head coach before, which, I guess in comparison to college coach, may not matter that much. You almost wonder, could he become a head coach, which is what his ultimate goal is? Could he become a head coach without having to be an offensive coordinator? Because the challenge is offensive coordinators get attention. If you lead an offense and it doesn't go well, all of a sudden you're off the track to become a head coach. Because if you're McGee, strategically, if you got offered a low-level college coaching job and you didn't have to become an offensive coordinator first, it's almost like you might consider doing that, because being an offensive coordinator is a good way to ruin your reputation, because play calling is just hard.
It can go wrong,
yeah.
And there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. McGee, it's worth mentioning, was a serious candidate to be the Georgia Southern coach after Willie Fritz left for Tulane, so it is something we think he wants to do. And it's not unprecedented to see position coaches go from being position coaches to being head coaches. Frank Wilson was the former LSU running back coach. He's now the head coach at UTSA. Ed Ogeron was a defensive line coach. Now, granted, he had an interim title, but he went from a defensive line coach to a head coach at LSU. So it's not out of the question. And moving this a little bit, talking about coaches moving and stuff. One thing I think Georgia fans aren't going to have to worry about, that I think some other programs will, is this threat or idea of an NFL team coming in and poaching away a coach. Like I think that's going to be a very big concern for Oklahoma next year. Just given NFL teams this hiring cycle, I think 6 of the 8 head coaches that were hired have offensive backgrounds. They want innovative offensive play callers. Lincoln Riley fits that mold. There are a number of other college guys. You saw Cliff Kingsbury go from fired Texas Tech coach to head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. If Kingsbury does good things with Arizona this year, which I don't think he will, but you never know, I think there's a chance that college teams start proliferating college offensive coaches, and I think that might keep Kirby at Georgia longer than 10 years ago. If Kirby wins a national title early on, NFL teams are going to come sniffing and looking at it.
Yeah, right now we're so offensive heavy when it comes to the NFL. That's an interesting point. Robert Barnes also says something kind of interesting too. He says that James Coley will not take just any head coaching job. I think he'll be with us at least for 2 more years. We have our next offensive coordinator for Coley on the staff now. So let me address the idea that Coley might be one of these offensive coordinators that waits to cherry pick the next job. Obviously, that's what Mark Richt did at Florida State. He waited for a long time, and he finally got the big offer to go be at Georgia. That's not what Mike Bobo did at Georgia. By the time he was in the head coaching pool, he didn't wait for the Power 5 offer. He went to Colorado State, and we'll kind of see how that works out for him in the long haul. I think one of the things that's different now than it was when Richt held out for Georgia, and to a certain extent even Bobo a few years ago, and I was doing some research on this Vince Dooley stuff last night, and I was reading an old AJC piece going back to the late 90s about Vince Dooley, and one of the things that referenced is that Jim Donnan, going into the 1999 season, that's about the time that Mark Richt was looking to leave Florida State for Georgia. It's at least relatively close. But at the time, Donnan was making $800,000 as Georgia's head coach, and that number just stopped me in my tracks because, my gosh, how many Georgia assistants this year will make about $800,000? It's just amazing how the money has changed in college football, which brings you back to James Coley. It used to be that you had to wait for the big job, the major Power 5 job, not just for your chance to win, but for your chance to really get paid, that the lower-level jobs just weren't able to pay that much. But, I mean, I think when you look at head coaching jobs now, because of just the huge amount of money that exists in college football, I think it's a lot easier for James Coley to get paid at a place like, I'll just throw it out there, like a Florida International or somewhere like that, a Troy, in a way that was unheard of as recently as a few years ago. So I hope that Georgia can keep Coley for a long time. I hope Georgia keeps this entire staff because I actually like the makeup of these 10 guys. But in modern times, especially with offensive-minded coaches, I think keeping them is really hard because they are all in demand much sooner, much quicker, and the money that's out there just gives people a chance to make decent money virtually everywhere they go.
Yep.
I mean, do this exercise in your mind for a moment. If we said, Connor, me, all of you watching right now, hey, let's come up with a list of head coaches that we would hire if, you can say Georgia or just some other school. You're the athletic director of Big State U. You got to hire a head coach. We could all come up with pretty good candidates for people we'd like to hire as head coaches because there's no shortage of guys that you think might leave one job for the next. But what if I said, now, you've got your head coach in place, but you've got to go out and hire an offensive coordinator. Give me 4 names. Give me 5 names. Give me 3 names. I'm talking to people right now who watch a lot of college football. Connor watches a lot of college football. I watch a lot of college football. The potential pool of offensive coordinators is just thin now. It's short because every one of these young whippersnappers gets hired as some head coach, and seemingly in a blink of an eye, they can be Sean McVay coaching in the NFL. it is amazing how thin the pool of up-and-coming offensive names are because of how desperate coaching at all levels is to find innovative offense.
I will say those guys come out of nowhere a lot quicker, both at the college and the pro level, than I think. It's not, while we can't really think of a whole lot of names right now, it's not to say that there won't be obvious names at the end of the 2019 season and thus into the 2019 hiring cycle. Like, guys are going to emerge. There are going to be offenses that surprise us. I'm sure there's going to be new offensive coordinators who, guys like Mike Gundy and Dana Holgorsen, who have sort of churned out offensive coordinators who've gone on to become good guys over the year. They're not going to stop doing that. Schools are going to want to hire, Lincoln Riley's top assistant, Holgorsen, Gundy, etc. It wouldn't surprise me before long if Florida's offensive coordinator Brian Johnson, even though he's really only an offensive coordinator in title only, I wouldn't surprise me if some schools tries to hire him as just because he's connected to what is a well-regarded offensive coordinator.
Georgia Peach on YouTube, Miriam Martin Corbin on Facebook kind of bring up a similar issue that the thing about the NFL compared to college is always the fact that you don't have to recruit in the NFL. You do have to recruit in college. I think what it creates in the NFL is some legitimate downtime. Now, you're still working a lot, but there are pockets of the season when you're not working nearly as much as you are in college where recruiting kind of never ends. And I think one of the good things that Kirby Smart is seemingly good at is that he finds coaches that are not fatigued by recruiting. Because after all, if you're a really driven guy, and Kirby Smart's the classic example of this, he's so driven to succeed that he actually benefits from the college level because there's a natural selection process. This industry sorts out the guys who want to recruit from the guys that recruit because they have to. And let's say that Kirby Smart won 3 national championships at Georgia. He'd almost be smart to stay in college as opposed to going to the NFL, because by going to the NFL, you've actually eliminated one of the great barriers that prevents most of the competition from ever getting to you, the fact that your engine runs all the time. I think that Jim Harbaugh is kind of the same way. Now, you can insert your own joke because Michigan hasn't been very good, but Harbaugh, because he is kind of a hard-driving guy, is actually probably a better fit in college, even though he hasn't won there yet, than he would be in the NFL, where that built-in advantage doesn't exist. I think that Saban has discovered that, too. There's always been these assumptions that eventually Saban would go back to the NFL to try to correct what some people believe is a blight on his resume, the fact that he only went 8-8 2 years in a row with the Miami Dolphins. But I think that Saban found a real comfort in college because he's willing to do the hard work that other people don't want to do. And I think that Kirby Smart, I won't presume to know his line of thinking on this too much, but when he finds a Trey Scott, when he finds a Cortez Hankton, when he finds a Dan Lanning, when he finds a Glenn Schumann, now he knew Schumann for a long time, but you get the point. Otherwise, when he finds these guys, I think one of the things that I'm assuming Kirby Smart must be thinking is, what's this guy going to be like 3 or 4 years down the road? Is he going to be just a candle that completely burns out, a horse that completely gives out? Or is this guy going to be just as hungry to go out and recruit then as he is right now? And I don't know how you look into a man's eye and figure that out, but seemingly Kirby's pretty good at figuring that out because he seems to have that same gleam in his own eye.
Can I defend? Am I allowed to defend Jim Harbaugh a little bit, or should I just keep that opinion to myself?
No, it's fine. I'll give the floor to you.
You said he hadn't been all that good in college, or around that.
Yeah.
He's had his teams have won 10 games for the last 5 seasons.
Sure.
He's been a college coach.
Yeah, I mean,
I know people think he's overpaid, which is another thing. Like, kudos to his agent for negotiating a huge salary, but he is a good coach.
Yeah, I'm not as anti-Harbaugh as some people might think.
Like Stuart Mandel didn't even have him in his top 25 coaches list this week, which is just patently absurd.
By the way, speaking of that, and it's 11:40, we got to get off the air here, y'all. I apologize. Let me do one real quick thing, and then we'll go. I know Mandel from The Athletic, link requires subscription. I know that he also brought up this idea this week of, well, what's going to be like at Georgia if Kirby Smart doesn't win a national championship in 2 years? Can I just say one thing about stuff like this? Basically, the question to him was, is Kirby going to be on the hot seat if he doesn't win a national championship in 2 years? I'm a big believer that stuff like this is a phony conversation. And I'll tell you why. There is no coach that could go 2 years in the Deep South, especially SEC included. There's no coach that can go 2 years of less than playoff contention, championship level success, and not have a lot to deal with his fan base. People assume that Saban's won enough that if they were to somehow not win the national championship in 2019, then Alabama fans would just be fine with it. They won't be. I mean, let Dabo Swinney, as good as he's been, let him miss the playoff 2 years in a row and see what Clemson fans start saying.
To give you an example of this, when Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game this year,
Uh-huh.
boy, that Alabama fan base is going to be asking, has Saban lost his touch? Does he know what he's doing? Has the game passed him by?
And people like Stuart Mandel know this. They just pretend otherwise because it makes it easy to write mailbags like the one that he wrote. So if Kirby Smart, if we're going into the, I guess would be the 2021 season, and Kirby still hasn't won a national championship, then the comments about Kirby are going to be nasty. Fair or unfair is not my place to determine. They're going to be nasty because Georgia is no different than any other fan base. Let's see what happens with Pruitt and Mullen this year, two guys that are going to their second year at their programs, and we expect big second-year bumps. Now, Florida, by record and ranking, had a pretty good 2018, but if it's not any closer to Georgia after another year on the job, let's watch next offseason for those guys. SEC fans, and I'm going to include Clemson in this too, they're for the most part all willing to tolerate one bad year. You miss the playoff, you fake a punt when you shouldn't have, whatever you want to talk about. Saban's national championship game too. SEC fans are kind of willing to sit on their hands for 1 year. Nobody is bulletproof enough to survive 2 consecutive years of disappointing results without there being just nasty, nasty comments about it. Doesn't mean the coach would get fired. Doesn't mean that it's even fair that fans feel that way. Everybody that coaches in the Deep South, and probably Ohio State's in this group too. I mean, the fan bases that truly care. Some would say care too much. But those intense followings, those intense competitions, nobody can go 2 years missing the playoff without dealing with a lot of nastiness.
That's why I think you see people come down so hard on Michigan.
Yeah.
They've been right there. They just, unfortunately, I've had to play Ohio State every year, and they just haven't been able to get over that hump. And because of that, people just rail on Harbaugh all the time. And, you're going to see that. If Dan Mullen, loses 3 or 4 games, if they lose to Auburn, LSU, Georgia, and they drop a game to Missouri like they shouldn't, it's a 9-4 record, and people are going to be like, how, he's clearly a good coach, but what's his ceiling? If Tennessee misses a bowl game again, the questions are, can Pruitt actually be a head coach? Is he handling this well? Is Philip Fulmer going to want to step in? So it's just sort of the nature of the beast, Gus Malzahn was, the king of the world going into the SEC championship game.
Gus is a perfect example of this.
And there's a very good chance, and I think there's a good chance it happens, that, if they don't do well this year and go 7-5, he's gone.
Yeah.
In the span of,
example of this.
24 months.
Yeah, honestly, every Auburn coach has been a perfect example of this.
That's just Auburn.
Chiswick, Tuberville, I mean, every single one of them is the perfect embodiment of what we're talking about, so it's fun stuff. Let me finish up with this. Bill Radford, good reminder, this weekend is Spring Forward Day, going from Saturday night into Sunday. Now, I love daylight savings time. I love the longer days. My least favorite day in the entire year is Spring Forward Day. I cannot stand losing an hour's sleep. When you got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, man, you need every hour you can get.
Do away with daylight savings. I'd rather just have it be light out later all year round. Have the sun out till like 7 o'clock every night. Do away with. I don't care about losing an hour in the spring or gaining an hour in the fall, because we're almost always traveling back from Georgia, Florida anyway when the fallback happens, and we're up so late. Just because it's a long day for us, it doesn't really matter anyway. So if we just decided to do away with daylight savings time, I'd be a very happy camper. All right,
good stuff. YouTube comment sections, everything else. Thank you very much for being a part of the program. Hope you'll have a great weekend. Thanks for being here on the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They will take good care of you. They'll show up. They'll do what you ask them to do, and you'll be really glad that you brought them in. So get that air conditioning ready to go. Daylight savings means also warmer weather. That means you want that air conditioning cranked up and working in the house. Make sure it's ready to go. Check out R.S. Andrews for that online at rsandrews.com. Great weekend, everybody. We'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily once again. We'll talk to you then.